A very good morning to all of you. Since yesterday, we started with modernism. Modernism is one of the literary moments in the development of literary criticism, as we are familiar with because you have written an assignment on it. The development of literary criticism during the major periods. So we have uh, understood what modernism is already. In this lecture, I shall first of all introduce you people to the famous poet, essayist, publisher, playwright, literary critic, and editor Thomas Turnus Eliot or T S Eliot. So you can understand how multidimensional he was. He was a poet, he was an essayist, he was a publisher, he was a playwright, he was a literary critic and editor. So multi-dimensional, multi-talented T.S. Eliot was, and he was a Nobel laureate as well. He received Nobel Prize for his Westland, the Westland, and he is considered one of the 20th century's major poets. He is among the major poets, one of the major poets of 20th century, and he is a central figure in English language modernist poetry. While talking about modernism, I refer to that. We refer to T.S. Eliot and some other contributors. So T.S. Eliot was a major figure in this particular movement. T.S. Eliot was born on 26th September 1888 at St. Louis, Missouri, United States. Means his origin is in the USA. And he died on 4th January 1965 at Kensington in England. And he's associated with modernism as we are familiar with it. Now let's try to understand something about his childhood first, and then we shall go ahead with his works. So in his childhood, T.S. Eliot suffered from a congenital double inguinal hernia. It's a kind of stomach disease, which prevented him from participating in many childhood activities. So you can understand he suffered from a very continuous hernia, we can say, and because of that he couldn't go out and play with his peers. He couldn't participate in childhood activities. So this was the problem with him. So because of that he had few friends. Few means almost no friends. When the article a is added, a few means some friends, but few means none. You might be knowing that it is not the language class, therefore I don't want to go into details of these things, but you should understand the difference between few and a few. A few is used positively and few is used negatively to indicate no. So he had few friends and spends most of his time reading stories about Wild West and savages. Okay, so when he kept on reading books, stories, etc. And he was especially fond of the adventures of Tom Sawyer. In 1898, Eliot entered Smith Academy, which was founded by his grandfather, William Greenleaf Eliot. So he studied many subjects. Among other subjects, he studied Latin, ancient Greek, French, and German. So these were the languages you can understand. Apart from other subjects, he studied these 4 languages in this academy. And his first poem, which he wrote at the age of 14, was inspired by Edward Fitzgerald, we can say, and his Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Edward Fitzgerald had translated Omar Khayyam into English, So Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam was the work which inspired him deeply as a child at the age of 14. And later, they turn out to be rather gloomy. And so actually he wrote many poems. He wrote poems at the age of 14, but later he destroyed them because he thought that they were very serious, they were very gloomy. So in 1905, he graduated from school and entered Milton Academy in Massachusetts. It's again the American state for a preparatory year. Preparatory year means then time the system was educational structure was different. You might be knowing. For example, in India as well, then time before after 10th there won't be 10th, there will be 11th examination, and in between after that there will be a preparatory year. There wasn't 10 plus 2. Okay, so it was 11 plus 1 plus then graduation. That was the structure. So he entered Milton Academy during that period. So this was also the time when his literary talent started blooming during this period. And his oldest poem means the poems which were written at the early period, which survives in manuscript. Manuscript means written, the written form with written in hand, means before printing. So the manuscripts are still available, and it was written in April 1905. And this particular poem was revised and printed in the Harvard Advocate as Song. The title of the poem was Song. And before that, in February 1905, he had another poem, A Fable for Prisoners, published in the Smith Academy Record. In the same year, he had written 3 stories. The stories were titled as Birds of Prey, A Tale of a Whale, and The Man Who Was King. And in 1906, he was enrolled at Harvard University. After the preparatory year, I told you, he went for graduation at Harvard University. He graduated, means he went for philosophy. He studied philosophy as his special subject. And during his university years, he was greatly influenced by certain philosophers like George Santayana, the philosopher and the poet, and Irving Babbitt, the critic. And he continued writing. And he made a good impression by contributing regularly to Harvard Advocate. That was a magazine, so published by Harvard University, and he made a good contribution to that magazine. So T S Eliot covered his undergraduate course in 3 years instead of 4 years. During those days, the undergraduate UG course was of 4 years, but because of his talent, he could cover it in 3 years. Okay, and received his Bachelor's of Art degree in 1909. And for 1 year, he worked as a philosophy assistant at Harvard before he moved to France in 1910. And during 1910 to 11, he studied philosophy at the Sorbonne University in Paris, where he attended lectures by the famous French philosopher Henri Bergson. And there he studied poetry with Henry Alban Fournier, John Webster, John Donne. Means actually he studied the poems by these poets, Jules Laforgue. And during this time, Eliot started developing his own style by studying poetry at Paris. And in 1911, he returned to Harvard, where he studied Indian philosophy and Sanskrit until 1914. So this particular phase has a deep influence on his career as a poet. He studied Sanskrit for 3 years, and thereafter he got a scholarship to Merton College, Oxford. So he left for England in 1914. And on the way to England, he stopped at Marburg, Germany. He had planned to take up a summer program there, but as the First World War broke out in the middle of 1914, you know it very well, when the temporary region, the Prince of Sarajevo, was killed. Archduke Austria, I'm sorry, the Prince of Austria was killed at Sarajevo, Buncia. Okay, he abandoned the idea and left for Oxford. Means he wanted to take some summer program at Germany, but he abandoned that idea because of the World War First. Now, this is the background that we need to understand. To understand T S Eliot, he was one of the greatest poets in English literature, and you can see that he had an origin in America, but he's mainly known as the British poet. So these are some of his works. I won't read the titles. You can go through them. They are available in your Canvas page as well. So he has received many awards, and I told you he received Nobel Prize for Literature for his outstanding contribution to present-day poetry in the year 1948. So this is how you can understand T S Eliot. And some of his poems were published, or some of his works were published after his death. So he has written many non-fiction works. Okay, and then he has written many plays, many poems. We can see he is well known for Prufrock and other observations. I won't read all these poems here, means titles of the poems. You can have a glance at them in your Canvas page. So this is how we understand T S Eliot and his contribution to the field of criticism and literature.